Every afternoon, the veteran Jake Riley witnessed a peculiar ritual. The sable German shepherd he privately called Ghost didn't come to play or beg for food. It just sat there, still as a statue, its amber eyes glued to the dusty window of the abandoned Miller house. Jake couldn't understand. What could possibly be inside that empty house to capture its attention so obsessively? He had no idea that the dog's silent loyalty was the key to unlocking a tragedy forgotten for 70 years, and that the answer would change the life of more than just one person. Please support us by subscribing to the Voice of Paws channel. What city in the world are you listening from? The air in the small Vermont town tasted of damp earth and decaying leaves, a clean, sharp scent that was a world away from the dust and smoke Jacob Riley had spent years trying to forget. At 45, Jake was a man seeking sanctuary, not from others, but from the noise inside his own head. He was a tall man, lean but with the sturdy frame of someone who had carried heavy burdens. His short brown hair was beginning to silver at the temples, framing a face that held kind eyes, though they often carried the distant look of a man watching a past that only he could see. He had bought the small, secluded house site unseen, drawn by the promise of quiet and the steady, grounding rhythm of 4 distinct seasons. It was here, he hoped, that he could finally build some peace. He was raking the last of the fiery autumn leaves from his lawn one crisp afternoon when he first felt it, that prickling sensation on the back of his neck that signals you are being watched. He slowly straightened up, his movements deliberate, and scanned the tree line that bordered his property. And there it was. A German shepherd, poised at the edge of the woods like a creature from a fairy tale. It was a magnificent animal, perhaps a year or two old, with a thick sable coat of gray and silver that blended perfectly with the muted colors of the forest. But it was the dog's eyes that held Jake's attention. They were intelligent, amber-colored, and tinged with a deep, ancient sadness that seemed strangely familiar. Jake took a slow, non-threatening step forward, but the dog simply watched him, its head tilted. It didn't bark or growl, it just observed, a silent statue of fur and bone. When Jake took another step, the shepherd turned with a fluid grace and melted back into the shadows of the trees, disappearing as silently as it had appeared. The encounter left a profound impression on Jake. Over the following days, the dog became a regular visitor. It never came close, never begged for food or attention. It would simply appear at the edge of the woods for a few minutes each day, a silent sentinel watching him work. Jake, who had known the partnership of military working dogs, felt a strange and growing connection. Those dogs had a purpose, a handler, a mission. This one was a mystery, a lone soul wandering the woods. He started calling it Ghost, a fitting name for the phantom that haunted the edge of his new life, a quiet companion in his solitude. As the weeks bled into a month, the vibrant colors of the Vermont autumn began to fade into the muted tones of late fall. Jake noticed a shift in Ghost's routine. The dog no longer appeared at the edge of his property to watch him. Instead, Jake would catch glimpses of the sable shepherd trotting with purpose down the quiet road. One afternoon, his curiosity got the better of him, and he followed at a distance. He found Ghost at the end of the lane, sitting perfectly still before the rusted iron gate of a dilapidated house. The paint was peeling from its walls like sunburnt skin, and the yard was a tangled mess of weeds and thorns. Yet Ghost sat before it with the dignity of a royal guard, its gaze fixed on the house, unblinking. This became its new ritual. Every afternoon, rain or shine, Ghost would take up its post. It was a silent, unwavering vigil. The dog's persistence was a thing of profound mystery, a quiet performance of loyalty that resonated deep within Jake's own soldier's heart. He felt he was witnessing a sacred duty. One day, he approached his neighbor, an elderly man named Mr. Henderson, who was often tending to his late-season roses. Jake asked him about the abandoned house. The old man squinted at the property. "That's the old Miller place," he said, his voice raspy with age. "Been empty for as long as I can remember. Heard there was some sad business there. But that was long before my time. The vague story only deepened the mystery, leaving Jake with more questions than answers. He couldn't shake the image of the dog sitting alone, waiting for something that would never come. That evening, Jake filled a clean bowl with fresh water and another with high-quality dog food. He walked down to the Miller place and left the bowls just inside the gate, in the exact spot where Ghost held its vigil. He did this every day. For the first few days, the food remained untouched, a silent offering to a ghost. But then one evening, he returned to find the food bowl empty. The dog remained wary, never letting Jake see it eat, but it was accepting his gifts. A silent pact had been formed between them. Jake could feel the dog's deep sorrow, a loyalty that transcended time and reason, and it ignited a fire in him. He had to know the secret Ghost was guarding. The final push came on a gray, overcast afternoon when the sky seemed to press down on the quiet town. Jake was watching from his window as Ghost took up its usual post. But today, the dog did something different. It walked directly up the decaying wooden steps to the front door of the Miller house and gently pawed at the door. It wasn't an aggressive or demanding scratch, but a soft, pleading gesture, full of a longing that Jake could feel even from across the road. In that moment, he knew his time as a passive observer was over. He had to go in. He walked around the perimeter of the old house, his steps quiet on the damp earth. At the back, shielded by overgrown bushes, he found what he was looking for: a small window where the glass had shattered long ago, leaving a dark, gaping hole. Hoisting himself through the window felt like crossing into another dimension. He landed softly on the dusty floor, his senses immediately overwhelmed. The air was thick and heavy with the smell of damp wood, decaying paper, and decades of undisturbed dust. Sunlight struggled to pierce the grime on the windows, casting long, hazy beams through the gloom. Every piece of furniture was draped in a white sheet, their forms transformed into ghostly silhouettes that populated the silent rooms. Jake felt a heartbreaking stillness, a profound emptiness that spoke of a life abruptly paused. It felt less like a house and more like a tomb, a place where time itself had stopped breathing. Ghost had slipped in silently behind him, moving through the spectral landscape with a quiet confidence, as if it were walking through its own memories. The dog led him into the main living room, straight to a large, imposing armchair covered by a sheet. It stopped, nudged the base of the chair with its nose, and then looked back at Jake, its amber eyes full of a clear, urgent meaning. Understanding. Jake pulled the sheet away, sending a cloud of dust into the air. He got down on his hands and knees, the floorboards groaning under his weight, and peered into the darkness beneath the chair. Tucked away in the deepest corner, he saw it. A dark strip of leather. He reached in and pulled it out. It was a dog collar, stiff and cracked with age. He ran his thumb over the small, tarnished metal plate, rubbing away the years of grime. An elegant script became visible. He read the single word aloud, his voice a low whisper in the silent room. Valor. Holding the worn leather collar, the name Valor, a heavy weight in his hand, Jake thought the search was over, but Ghost knew better. The dog turned from the armchair and walked with purpose towards the dark, narrow staircase leading to the attic, looking back over its shoulder to ensure Jake was following. The mission was not yet complete. Jake followed the shepherd up the creaking stairs into the oppressive heat of the attic. The air was thick with the scent of ancient wood and dry paper. Dust motes danced like tiny stars in the single beam of light from a dirt-caked window. Ghost padded silently across the floorboards, ignoring the clutter of a forgotten life, and stopped before an olive-drab military footlocker tucked away under the eaves. It nudged the rusted latch with its nose, then looked at Jake, its amber eyes demanding action. With a sense of reverence for a fellow soldier, Jake knelt and lifted the heavy lid. The smell of cedar filled the small space. Inside, everything was neatly arranged. There was a stack of letters, tied with a faded blue silk ribbon. There were several black and white photographs, and sitting on top of the letters was a small wooden German shepherd, carved with incredible detail and love. Jake picked up one of the photos. It showed a vibrant young woman with sparkling eyes and a joyful smile, her arm linked with a handsome young man in a crisp army uniform. Standing proudly at their feet was a German Shepherd puppy, Valor. Jake's heart ached. He sat on the dusty floor and carefully untied the ribbon. He spent the next hour lost in time, reading the letters between Amelia Miller and Private Daniel. They painted a vivid picture of a powerful love, full of dreams of a future after the war, of building a life together in this very house. Daniel wrote about the puppy, Valor, calling him a furry down payment on their future, a living promise that he would return. The last letter in the stack was not from Daniel. It was a cold, formal letter from the War Department, its typed words a brutal finality. Private Daniel had been killed in action in France. The story hit Jake with the force of a physical blow. He understood the hope in those letters, the fear, the promises. He understood the deafening silence that followed a letter like that. He looked from the smiling faces in the photograph to the little wooden dog, a symbol of a promise that war had broken. In that dusty attic, holding the relics of a stranger's life, Jake felt a profound, painful connection to the soldier who never came home and the woman who spent a lifetime waiting for him. Back in the warmth of his own small house, with the contents of the soldier's footlocker spread carefully on his table, Jake felt a profound shift within him. The quiet, aimless days of his new life were over. He now had a purpose, a focus that pulled all his scattered thoughts into a single, sharp point. This was no longer just about a curious dog or an abandoned house. It was about honoring a fallen brother in arms, a soldier whose story had been silenced by time. He felt a powerful responsibility to give Daniel's memory and Amelia's enduring love a voice. He knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that this was a way to quiet his own ghosts. By bringing this story to light, by finding a final resting place for their memory, perhaps he could find some measure of peace for himself. He gave it a name, a designation his military mind understood. This was his final mission. With renewed discipline, Jake began his investigation. He approached the task with the same methodical precision he had once used to plan operations. His laptop became his command center, the faint glow of the screen illuminating his determined face late into the night. He started with the names, Daniel and Amelia Miller, and the location, this small Vermont town. He dove into online archives, digital census records, and military databases, searching for any trace, any connection that was not already in the letters. But the trail was more than 70 years old, cold, and faint. The names were common, the records sparse. Days turned into weeks of frustrating dead ends and false leads. Ghost seemed to understand the importance of his work, often lying quietly on the floor by his desk, a silent, furry partner in his late-night vigils. The breakthrough came from a place of sorrow. After weeks of searching, Jake found a digital copy of Amelia Miller's obituary from nearly 2 decades ago. It was short and simple, but it contained the one clue he needed. She was survived by a beloved brother, Thomas Miller. That was the thread. From there, Jake painstakingly traced Thomas's family line, following it down through the generations. He built a family tree, name by name, until it led him to the present day. Finally, he found it in the county's public property records. The deed to the old Miller house, legally transferred upon the death of Amelia's nephew, now belonged to a great-nephew. His name was Liam Miller. A quick online search confirmed it. Liam was an architect at a successful firm in Boston. The search also revealed a recent listing for the property, not for the house, but for the land itself. Liam intended to sell. A new urgency gripped Jake. He had found the heir, but now he was in a race against time to save the story before it was demolished forever. The phone call was the hardest part of the mission. Jake, his heart pounding with a nervous energy he had not felt in years, dialed the number for the architect in Boston. The man who answered, Liam Miller, was polite, but his voice was brisk and businesslike. He was initially skeptical, and Jake could hear the impatience of a busy city professional. But something in Jake's earnest, steady tone as he spoke of a forgotten family history made Liam pause. He reluctantly agreed to drive up to Vermont that weekend. Liam arrived in a sleek, modern car that looked out of place on the quiet gravel road. He was a young man in his early 30s, dressed in sharp urban clothes, with a friendly but guarded expression. Jake led him not to the old house, but to his own, where the contents of the footlocker were laid out on the kitchen table like sacred relics. As Jake told the story of Amelia and Daniel, of valor and a promise broken by war, he watched Liam's professional demeanor crumble. The young architect picked up the faded photographs, his fingers tracing the smiling face of the great-grand-aunt he never knew. The skepticism in his eyes was replaced by a profound, raw emotion. As they sat in shared, respectful silence, a familiar shape appeared at Jake's screen door. It was Ghost. Liam looked up, and his jaw dropped. His face, moments ago full of sorrow, was now a mask of disbelief. "Kaiser," he whispered, his voice cracking. At the sound of the name, the dog's ears shot up. The reserved, melancholy sentinel was gone. In its place was a joyful, whining dog who launched himself at Liam, covering him in ecstatic licks. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. Liam explained, his voice thick with emotion, that Kaiser had run away from his Boston apartment months ago. He thought he had lost him forever. They both stood in awe, realizing the incredible truth. Some unknowable instinct, some echo of loyalty passed down through generations, had guided Kaiser home. The for sale sign never went up. Liam Miller, the architect, found a new project, one far more meaningful than any city skyscraper. He decided to restore the old house, to honor the legacy of his family. He spent his weekends in Vermont, and he and Jake, the two men brought together by a ghost dog, became the firmest of friends. They worked side by side, clearing out the old house, letting the sunlight and fresh air in for the first time in decades. Jake was no longer a solitary man seeking refuge. He was part of something, a friend, a mentor. From his porch, he would watch Liam working next door, and Kaiser, the dog who was both Ghost and Valor's legacy, would trot happily between the two houses, a living bridge between past and present. Jake had finally found his peace, not in solitude, but in connection. He had found his home, and in doing so, had ensured a soldier's promise was finally, beautifully honored. A promise of love, much like the loyalty of a faithful dog, can echo through generations, just waiting for a heart quiet enough to hear it. The story of Valor and Kaiser reminds us that the strongest bonds are the ones that are never truly broken by time or distance. We believe that every family, every quiet neighborhood holds similar tales of devotion. If this story touched you, we would be honored if you shared your own thoughts in the comments below. A simple like helps these stories find their way to others who need to hear them. To become part of our community and never miss a tale from the voice of Paws, we hope you will subscribe. Your next journey can begin right now, as another story is waiting for you on the screen.